The nation's largest fuel pipeline halted operations after a ransomware attack. But what does this suggest about the state of critical infrastructure security at large? Stick around. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Today in Tech. I'm Juliette Beauchamp, and I am here with Mark Weatherford, the CISO at Alert Enterprise and Chief Strategy Officer at the National Cybersecurity Center. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Julia, and thanks for having me.
So first off, I know we're a couple days into this pipeline shutdown, but can you just give us a brief overview of the ransomware attack itself and how attackers were able to gain entry to Colonial Pipeline, that's the fuel pipelines, networks?
Well, we don't really know yet. I mean, so according to a brief yesterday by CISA, the DHS Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, they said they do not currently know the original intrusion vector for the Colonial compromise. But they also said that the intrusion solely impacted the business network, and the shutdown of the operational network was taken out of an abundance of caution while the investigation was underway. So I think, what we know first off is that, they've engaged with FireEye to come in and investigate and do forensics. So it'll probably be a while before anything is publicly shared. And I read also yesterday, the federal government offered to help, but Colonial declined and said they kind of had everything underway with FireEye. So taking the systems offline, was that appropriate or not? I think it was. You have to be overly cautious here, because when you start talking about OT systems, you're talking about physical systems and things that break and go boom. Mm-hmm. So even though it was a business network and apparently not the control system, until you kind of more completely understand this thing, you just can't be sure that the compromise didn't jump the segmentation gap between the IT and the OT systems. And as I said, the OT systems are what control the physical distribution of that oil and gas and diesel and jet fuel, going down the pipe. So criminal manipulation of those systems could result in, real world security, physical security problems like, over pressurization of the pipes, misrouting of the fuel to someplace where it shouldn't go, or even just, unplanned release of those products, when and where they shouldn't be released. So I suspect that was the main reason, but probably one of the other reasons is that the business network, the IT network, is actually where they manage the business. So I suspect that they lost the ability to actually figure out how to bill their customers, how to figure out who's getting what and how much. So they did what any prudent business would do, and they hit the pause button until they can figure out how to deliver the product and then how to bill their customers for that.
It's interesting to me, just from my understanding of critical infrastructure security, and I know it's talked about a lot, at least in my conversations with security experts. Infrastructure security is concerning because it kind of feels especially dystopian and sci-fi. And my understanding of critical infrastructure security was something that Colonial Pipeline, for example, but any other number of critical infrastructure companies, power grids, water, what have you. It seems like IoT devices can be especially vulnerable. And it's interesting to me, I guess, that they sort of entered through the business network and not like a random sensor in somewhere in the country.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually how most of these events kind of transpire is, they get in via malicious email, via somebody clicking on a link that compromises a system that may not have been patched. Right. And then, once they get that foothold, then they typically can go anywhere. And that's probably one of the reasons why Colonial shut down everything, because they didn't know if the bad guys, even if they may have, compromised the IT network, did they actually get a toehold into an OT network somewhere that they weren't aware of?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit now just about the fallout and where we kind of go from here. I think what's kind of interesting, but also concerning, is that this cyber attack was carried out by DarkSide, which is an Eastern European cyber criminal group, and it feels like I mentioned, a little bit sci-fi that a foreign group can, I mean, easily or perhaps not easily, hack into something as critical as a fuel pipeline that distributes or delivers around 45% of the fuel to the eastern seaboard. And I'm kind of wondering, what does this say about critical infrastructure security at large? And I'm also intrigued about the national security concern here.
Yeah. Well, and you should be. I would say first off, this is not a new threat. This is something we've been talking about and warning about for years. It was reported several years ago that foreign governments have already compromised our electricity and our oil and gas infrastructure. Unfortunately, and I hate to bash on somebody, but government leadership in the White House and the legislature have just been dawdling along, calling every new incident a wake-up call or an unprecedented security breach. I mean, just yesterday, Energy Secretary Granholm called the attack a reminder that we need to take a hard look at our infrastructure. And my response to that is no, we don't need any more reminders.
Right.
We need action.
We've been reminded.
Yeah, I wrote an article in Governing Magazine about this last month where I said, we don't need any more wake-up calls. We've had, if we're not awake after dozens of these major cybersecurity incidents, we never will be. So, this lack of federal leadership puts organizations like CISA in a really tough spot because they're constantly reacting to these things without any kind of national policy on cybersecurity. And the folks at CISA, I guarantee you today, they're working their hearts out, but they can only do so much without leadership that actually takes cybersecurity seriously. And I think in our quest to automate everything and create more efficiency in our critical infrastructures, we've deployed technologies without really taking the time to ensure that they're appropriately protected. This happened to be in Pensacola, Florida last weekend, just 3 days ago. And I stopped at 4 different gas stations to fill up my rental car with gas on the way to the airport. All 4 gas stations were empty, no gas. This was just less than 72 hours from the Colonial incident. And, panic buying had already begun. When I went to the first one, I thought, well, this is odd, gas station being out. But by the time I hit the third one, I started putting the pieces together. I'm like, holy cow, this is already having a national kind of, supply chain impact. And, I don't even like talking about some of these vulnerable infrastructures. You talked about, we're very aware of oil and gas and electricity, but what about telecommunications? What about healthcare? There's a lot of there's 16 national critical infrastructures, and every one of these can be impacted by it. I don't like to talk about it because it sounds like FUD and you can get people stirred up. But if you think about this, if a simple ransomware attack by a criminal group, not even a nation state actor, can have this kind of supply chain impact, the answer is yes, we have a national security concern. What would happen to the financial markets if someone created enough misinformation that the stock market became untrustworthy? The supply chain implications of this attack are really a big deal. Even the oil producers, the people that are pumping oil to get in the pipe, they had to shut down because they didn't have any place to put the oil, to store the oil. So, these ripple effects throughout the economy are really, really important. And speaking of electricity, about 40% of the nation's electricity is generated by natural gas. So there's a very real possibility that the power grid could have been affected by this, if we couldn't get, gas to where it needed to be. So, I don't mean to sound like the boogeyman, but these are the kinds of things that we worry about in this cybersecurity business.
Absolutely. I think I It's interesting what you said about, every time this happens, people saying, "Oh, wow, this is a really important reminder," or "This is, we really need to start paying attention to this." But it doesn't seem, at least from what you've said, that there's been a lot of action. So I'm curious, what kind of action would you like to see from either the government or perhaps in conjunction with critical infrastructure companies?
Sure. Well, I think there's a lot of things. First off, and so I'll give the government a little bit of credit. The Cyberspace Solarium Commission last year did a really good report and made some very good recommendations that Congress actually acted on this year. And so some of these things are finding their way into legislation and law now. But one thing that's very disconcerting, I think, to a lot of people. We have a $2 trillion critical infrastructure bill that the president's pushed, but there's very little money in that $2 trillion for cybersecurity. So that's what we need to be doing. We need to be thinking about how we can be investing in these critical infrastructures that really need this kind of security. They need this kind of security attention that they haven't had, up till this point.
So, in your view, was this event kind of a one-off, or is this going to be part of our new reality if there aren't, bold, sweeping cybersecurity measures taken?
Yeah, again, I hate sounding like the boogeyman, but this is the new reality. Until and this is where I've been telling is until nations around the globe say enough is enough and begin working together to stop these kinds of groups from operating so indiscriminately, these things are going to continue. And while the finger's not pointing directly at Russia for the colonial event, it's believed that the criminals are operating out of Russia with a pretty free hand. And as long as they don't target Eastern European countries or companies, Russia kind of lets them have a free hand in this. So that should be considered unacceptable. And imagine the global howls if a Western company like the United States were, allowed this kind of criminal activity to occur here. And while at least Russia and China, they kind of pretend to know where the red lines exist, even if they cross them sometimes. But the question always in the back of my mind is, do we think that North Korea, Iran, or a cyber terrorist organization with absolutely no concern about kicking the daylights out of civilization would exercise any discretion if they thought they could pull something like this off? Probably not.
Got it. So I guess my next question is kind of, where do we go from here? Colonial Pipeline says that they're expecting to have at least some systems restored by the end of the week. This is very much an evolving situation. So, at the time of recording, that's the expected timeline. So what is the long-term fallout here? And even if Colonial Pipeline returns to business as usual, what should it and also other critical infrastructure companies be considering in their security strategies?
Yeah. Well, this is probably not the answer you would expect, but I think the long-term fallout is simply more distrust. We've gone through this really period of time where people distrust everything. They distrust everyone and everything. So I think, the fallout is more distrust that the government can actually regulate critical infrastructure effectively enough to keep society safe. And secondly, more distrust of private critical infrastructure companies that they're actually taking security seriously. There's been this convergence of IT, OT, and physical security over the past decade or so, which is proper. I mean, it has to happen because there's so many efficiencies and cost savings that can be gained from this convergence. But however, implementing these security controls between these different disciplines of security is more than just segmenting them off. We need more and better visibility. And this is technology. We need more and better visibility of networks, systems, and protocols to actually understand when bad guys are trying to do bad things. And we don't have that visibility deployed as broadly as we could today. And, I think, that's somewhere where that the $2 trillion from the American Rescue Plan, should be going to critical infrastructure to actually redirect to address these kind of problems.
So I guess leaning on your experience as the chief strategy officer at the National Cybersecurity Center, what do you have any sort of like concrete steps or concrete examples of what companies like Colonial Pipeline or other, water, electric, like you said, healthcare companies can do to make sure that they're on alert? Because it really seems like, as with many things in cybersecurity, you're never going to be fully protected. And you also want to stay very alert to the threats to your enterprise, to your company, and to also just to, the common person. Because when you have a fuel pipeline, for example, you mentioned in Florida, it was difficult to get gas. I know around the East Coast, we are a little bit spared here in Massachusetts, but gas prices are rising. There's a shortage, and this is all happening so quickly. So, what are some concrete steps that you think that not necessarily Colonial Pipeline, but certainly they're included, obviously, in the larger group of critical infrastructure?
Yeah, well, I think some just fundamentals, and there are a number of things, but without sounding like a broken record, I think companies need to have good backups, and that's the first thing everyone will tell you is have good backups. But having good backups is really, really important. But but making sure that your systems are patched and kept up to date can go a long way to keep the criminals from actually getting in the first place. And probably most important and the easiest thing is to constantly train your employees about being aware. People are the number one vector, always the number one vector for how these kind of incidents start. I think we'll find out that we will find this out as this Colonial thing evolves, that it was probably an employee somewhere that downloaded a file or clicked on a link or did something that they shouldn't have done, which is what allowed the dark side folks to, or the dark side affiliates, to get their toehold in there. So I think that's what companies need to be thinking about. What I think the government needs to be thinking about is, today the electricity industry is the only critical infrastructure sector in America that has mandatory cybersecurity standards. And we cannot continue this whack-a-mole approach. I read a piece this morning that said FERC was recommending mandatory standards for the pipeline industry. That's a typical government knee-jerk response. What about the other critical infrastructure? Nobody likes regulations, but when the safety and security of society are at stake, we simply can't leave it to private companies to make the right decision about investing in security. So we need to have a more holistic government response for mandatory cybersecurity standards for those critical infrastructures the society depends on.
Sure. I've got one more question for you that I just thought of. It just is dealing a little bit with ransomware, because it's certainly cyber attacks are sort of the more interesting and attention grabby kind of security news. But my question, I know general guidance, especially from the FBI, is never negotiate with ransomware criminals. And it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Colonial Pipeline has brought in an outside group. What is your impression of how this is going to all go away?
So we don't know if they paid the ransom or not.
Right.
And I have always had a problem when people say never pay the ransom, you're just encouraging bad behavior. And I think on the surface, we would all agree with that. But I can tell you, if you're a hospital and you've been ransomwared, and you can't access any patient files, and you've got to start moving patients to other hospitals, you're going to consider paying a ransom. Or, if you're in the e-commerce business and you're losing tens of millions of dollars a day in transaction, you're going to consider paying a ransom. And so, these guys are very sophisticated. It's not like it was 10 years ago. They typically research who and how much a CEO or who in the organization is allowed discretionary spending authority without having to go to the board. And that's how they figure out how much the ransom is going to be. So, it's not, cybersecurity is hard. This ain't making cupcakes, and the threat environment changes every single day. And, we've got to get our arms around this ransomware thing. And it's going to require a global approach to addressing these things. The United States can't do it alone. If other countries are going to continue to allow this activity to happen, it's not going to do us any good to try to fight this global, threat by ourselves.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Mark. I think this is some really valuable insight about not only the state of the specific cyber attack, but also just about the landscape at large, which it seems like, to sum up your points, there's a lot of work to be done.
A lot of work to be done. Yes, sir.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you calling in and chatting with me. And thanks,
Julia.
And thank you all so much for watching this episode Today in Tech. If you liked this video, please do give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed yet to our channel, hit the subscribe button in the lower corner and hit the bell icon so you're notified every single time we post a new video. If you have any questions or comments surrounding this cyber attack, I'd really like to hear what your thoughts are. So please leave them in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.